Hey, what's up, stock compounders? Brad here. So 2 days ago, on Saturday, February 25th, Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway released his annual letter. Okay, it's only 10 pages long, but there are a lot of gems in here. It's a very densely packed annual letter. So I'm going to take you through some of my highlights from it, and we'll go from there. So here, it takes a full page to list the performance of Berkshire versus the S&P over 58, 57 years since 1965. We can see this compounded annual gain of just shy of 20%, okay, versus 9.9 for the S&P. So the first thing I want to point out here, the first paragraph: Charlie Munger, my longtime partner, and I have the job of managing the savings of a great number of individuals. We are grateful for their enduring trust, a relationship that often spans much of their adult lifetime. It is those dedicated savers that are the forefront in my mind as I write this letter. So right away, we see this fiduciary gene that Warren Buffett has. He really cares about his partners. It reminds me, the second paragraph, let's not jump ahead. A common belief is that people choose to save when young, expecting thereby to maintain their living standards after retirement. Any assets that remain at death, this theory says, will usually be left to their families or possibly to friends and philanthropy. Our experience has differed. We believe Berkshire's individual holders largely to be of the once a saver, always a saver variety. Though these people live well, they eventually dispense most of their funds to philanthropic organizations. These in turn redistribute the funds by expenditures intended to improve the lives of a great many people who are unrelated to the original benefactor. Sometimes the results have been spectacular. So the second and third paragraph here remind me of the marshmallow test, okay? And what is the marshmallow test? It was an experiment on children where they were given a marshmallow. Now, the child had a choice. They could either eat the marshmallow right away, in which case they would not receive another marshmallow, or they could wait 15 minutes, and then they would get a second marshmallow, okay? The people who tend to invest in Berkshire Hathaway, they're of this second group, right? Where they're patient, waiting to get the second marshmallow. But beyond that, it's not just for their own benefit, okay? It's even a third group that nobody talks about, which is patience, knowing, hey, this isn't really for me, okay? It's something I'm going to pass on. I'm going to live my life frugally, even as I amass all of this wealth. So it's a pretty special group of people that make up Berkshire Hathaway. So that jumped out at me. And he talks about at the end here, the disposition of money unmasks humans. Charlie and I watch with pleasure the vast flow of Berkshire-generated funds to public needs, and alongside the infrequency with which our shareholders opt for look-at-me assets and dynasty building. So that was a fun section to read there. Over the years, I have made many mistakes. Consequently, our extensive collection of businesses currently consists of a few enterprises that have truly extraordinary economics, many that enjoy very good economic characteristics, and a large group that are marginal. Okay, that really stood out to me. When I read that, I was like, well, why do they have so many that are marginal? Why not just cut those and double down on the ones that are exceptional or even just very good? Along the way, other businesses in which I have invested have died, their products unwanted by the public. Capitalism has two sides. The system creates an ever-growing pile of losers while concurrently delivering a gusher of improved goods and services. Schumpeter called this phenomenon creative destruction. So that stood out to me. I was surprised for him to say that a large group are marginal, really just marginal businesses. Possibly he bought them such a long time ago. It's such, it's basically all capital gain, and there's dividends coming in every year. In the case of Coca-Cola, we'll see later, the dividends that Berkshire is collecting each year are about half of the total capital that Berkshire put into Coca-Cola. So even with the business maybe of deteriorating quality over time, if the dividends are still growing and the dividends are that big a percentage of the initial capital outlay, it can certainly be compelling to just hold. The next thing I want to talk about is this report card. At this point, a report card from me is appropriate. In 58 years of Berkshire management, most of my capital allocation decisions have been no better than so-so. So that was shocking for me to read. Warren Buffett, one of the greatest, perhaps the greatest investor of all time, is saying his capital allocation decisions have been so-so. In some cases, also, bad moves by me have been rescued by very large doses of luck. Our satisfactory results, he's very, very modest here. Satisfactory results, 20% per year versus 10% for the S&P, have been the product of about a dozen truly good decisions. That would be one every 5 years, and a sometimes forgotten advantage that favors long-term investors such as Berkshire. So he talks about a few of these investment decisions, but let's look at this tweet on the day that this letter was released from Monish Pabrai. Here he quotes, "Our satisfactory results have been the product of about a dozen truly good decisions." And, Pabrai is trying to figure out what were these dozen decisions. So he comes up with a list: hiring Ajit Jain. And then the rest are kind of business acquisitions or investments. National Indemnity, Apple, Berkshire Hathaway Energy, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe Railroad, Geico, Bank of America, See's Candy, Coca-Cola, and American Express. And then Pabrai put it out to the masses, what might be the last two. Okay, so I'm guessing, wild guess here, the Washington Post in 1973, maybe in that dozen good decisions, truly good decisions. Washington Post and Moody's may be in that list as well from 2000. But this list of 10 that Pabrai came up with, pretty strong candidates. So that was a fun little tweet storm that Pabrai put out, and you could see a lot of back and forth with investors that Pabrai had on Twitter, trying to get to the bottom of, okay, what decisions was Buffett really pointing to there? So let's get to this sometimes forgotten advantage. The lesson for investors: the weeds wither away in significance as the flowers bloom. Over time, it takes just a few winners to work wonders. And yes, it helps to start early and live into your 90s. Okay? So the lesson here is have patience. When you've come across a great company, sometimes even by accident, in the portfolio, hang on to it. Recognize it as a great business. And just sit back and let those businesses make you rich. So that's a lesson that keeps coming up over and over in value circles. But I really like how Buffett put it here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about operating earnings versus GAAP earnings. This was a pretty stark contrast here. The GAAP earnings are 100% misleading when viewed quarterly or even annually. Capital gains, to be sure, have been hugely important to Berkshire over past decades, and we expect them to be meaningfully positive in future decades, but their quarter-by-quarter gyrations, regularly and mindlessly headlined by the media, totally misinform investors. So take a look at Buffett's, actual operating earnings from each quarter versus the generally accepted accounting principle earnings that they're required to report. It's insane, the gyrations here. In fact, the two best quarters had negative GAAP earnings. So, that's just something to keep in mind. If you really want to understand a business, you've got to go deeper than GAAP earnings, especially for a company like Berkshire, where a large part of it is these publicly traded securities that gyrate wildly with investor emotions in the stock market. The next thing I want to point out is this last paragraph here. Clearly Buffett got a little fired up about share buybacks and how they're being portrayed by the media. When you are told that all repurchases are harmful to shareholders or to the country or particularly beneficial to CEOs, you are listening to either an economic illiterate or a silver-tongued demagogue. These characters don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive. Okay, so you could have both in the same person. So clearly, Buffett's a little fired up there. And Charlie talked a little bit about this in the Daily Journal meeting as well, that he strongly disagrees with the increased tax being proposed on corporate share buybacks. The power of trust. Let's see, where is that? I'm on the right page. Yeah, power of trust. Thus began our journey. Okay. Sorry guys, let me just find this spot here. Yeah. Thus began our journey to 2023, a bumpy road involving a combination of continuous savings by our owners, that is, by their retained earnings, the power of compounding, our avoidance of major mistakes, and most important of all, the American tailwind. Okay, Buffett often in the annual meeting or in his letters will talk about the American tailwind. Never bet against America. Such an incredible country we live in. America would have done fine without Berkshire. The reverse is not true. So, yeah. He loves America, and I get it. He points out a lot of compelling reasons here and in the past about why, it's such a brilliant country for building wealth and personal freedoms, obviously, as well. As far as for the future. As for the future, Berkshire will always hold a boatload of cash and U.S. Treasury bills along with a wide array of businesses. We will also avoid behavior that could result in any uncomfortable cash needs at inconvenient times, including financial panics and unprecedented insurance losses. Our CEO will always be Chief Risk Officer, a task it is irresponsible to delegate. Additionally, our future CEO will have a significant part of their net worth in Berkshire shares bought with their own money. Okay? None of this share-based compensation business. And yes, our shareholders will continue to save and prosper by retained earnings. At Berkshire, there will be no finish line. So the big thing that jumped out here for me, Chief Risk Officer. Okay? Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger, they've really gotten to this point largely by avoiding mistakes, by focusing on the downside. Okay, making sure when SHIT hits the fan, they are in a strong position to take advantage of the opportunities that arise when you have everybody rushing to the exits. And a lot of investors just being forced sellers, right? Because they've made bad decisions in terms of managing risk, taking on margin, being over leveraged. That's really when Berkshire kind of leaps forward. So that's a really valuable lesson to let sink in. At Berkshire, we hope and expect. At Berkshire, we hope and expect to pay much more in taxes during the next decade. We owe the country no less. America's dynamism has made a huge contribution to whatever success Berkshire has achieved, a contribution Berkshire will always need. We count on the American tailwind, and though it has been becalmed from time to time, its propelling force has always returned. Okay? Similar theme here, never bet against America. I have been investing for 80 years, more than 1/3 of our country's lifetime. Despite our citizens' penchant, almost enthusiasm for self-criticism and self-doubt, I have yet to see a time when it made sense to make a long-term bet against America. And I doubt very much that any reader of this letter will have a different experience in the future. So now we're going to talk about Charlie Munger. Nothing beats having a great partner. Charlie and I think pretty much alike, but what it takes me a page to explain, he sums up in a sentence. His version, moreover, is always more clearly reasoned and also more artfully, some might add blatantly, stated. Here are a few of his thoughts, many lifted from a very recent podcast. I'm guessing this is the Daily Journal meeting. I searched podcasts. I cannot find any podcast that Charlie Munger has been in recently. I'm assuming it's from the Daily Journal annual meeting. The world is full of foolish gamblers, and they will not do as well as the patient investor. Okay? It is very easy to get sucked into this, the hype, right? As the market accelerates, prices go higher and higher, these bubbles start to form. It is so easy to fall into the trap of piling in to very speculative opportunities, especially near the end when they're just about to pop. So really, we need to orient so much everything about our investing style to guard against this. If you don't see the world the way it is, it's like judging something through a distorted lens. Okay? Just another incredible thing to really have at the forefront. Recognizing our own biases, right? What lenses do we have that distort how we perceive reality, that gets in the way of us being able to see things as they are? All I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there. And a related thought early on, write your desired obituary and then behave accordingly. Death is probably something not a lot of people like to spend much time thinking about, but it's a very powerful exercise to jump to the end and work backwards. At the end, how do I want to have impacted people? What do I want them to be saying about me? at my funeral. And then you can work backwards to today. Okay, how do I need to design my life so that that's where I end up? If you don't care whether you are rational or not, you won't work for it. Then you will stay irrational and get lousy results. This is not a sexy thing to work on, guys. I've been making a video series about Charlie Munger's 25 psychology of human misjudgment. Basically 25 biases that he's identified throughout his life. And they don't get nearly the views that some of the more, videos on individual stocks, particularly Alibaba, get. And, it makes sense. It's hard. It's hard work. It's easy to think it's not that sexy. But when you're able to shift your psychology and improve your rationality and see the world more clearly, that is something that's really going to move the needle on your results. So hopefully you guys care whether you're rational or not, and focus each and every day. Take steps to become more rational. That's really Charlie's key to success. What made you successful, Charlie? I strived to be rational as possible. Patience can be learned. I was a little surprised to see that. Having a long attention span and the ability to concentrate on one thing for a long time is a huge advantage, right? This in a world where distractions are more and more, right here, distraction. It's just right at my fingertips. That is a huge disadvantage if you allow yourself to be constantly distracted. You can learn a lot from dead people. Read of the deceased you admire and detest, right? Read both sides. Don't bail away in a sinking boat if you can swim to one that is seaworthy. Okay, this reminds me of Buffett initially buying Berkshire Hathaway. And it took him a while. It took him longer than it probably should have to realize that was a sinking boat. But he was able to swim to some boats, some vessels that were seaworthy before that one completely sunk. So that's in some ways the origin story of Berkshire Hathaway. A great company keeps working after you are not. A mediocre company won't do that. It's really the story of compounding. Warren and I don't focus on the froth of the market. We seek out good long-term investments and stubbornly hold them for a long time, right? That was the secret, right? That was the key to these 12 good decisions, okay? Was to hold on, ride that incredible wave. Ben Graham said, day to day, the stock market is a voting machine. In the long term, it's a weighing machine. If you keep making something more valuable, then some wise person is going to notice it and start buying. I think what that means, if you're building a business and you're a public company, it's so easy to get distracted, right, by the wild gyrations in the stock price. But if you just focus on the business, you focus on the customers, day to day, how can I make this thing more valuable today than it was yesterday? That's how you build a great business. And the investors will follow. Wise investors will follow. There is no such thing as a 100% sure thing when investing. Thus, the use of leverage is dangerous. A string of wonderful numbers times 0 will always equal 0. Don't count on getting rich twice. That's a powerful statement. A string of wonderful numbers times 0 will always equal 0, right? That really shines a light on the danger of leverage. You don't, however, need to own a lot of things in order to get rich. Stay with what you know. Stick with what you know. You have to keep learning if you want to become a great investor. When the world changes, which it's constantly changing, you must change, unless you can really stick to the tiny areas of the world that barely change, right? Buffett he was talking about how the first time he met Bill Gates was saying, you got to get a computer, right? This is going to change everything. And Warren was like, well, is it going to change how I chew gum? No, didn't change how he chewed gum. So, you got to keep learning. You got to be a continuous learning machine. But you can also, I think Jeff Bezos said this as well, focus on the things that don't change in terms of investing. That can be a really good place to look for opportunities, because the things that don't change, if it's around at 100 years because it's not changing, well, that could be an incredible compounding opportunity, right? If you're in an industry that changes really fast, like cloud computing, well, how many companies are going to be able to be dominant in that for decades, right? To really let this compound growth engine rev up. How often is something like that going to be disrupted because of the pace of technological change? So that's something I think about. Warren and I hated railroad stocks for decades. Here's another industry that maybe doesn't change very fast. But the world changed, and finally the country had 4 huge railroads of vital importance to the American economy. We were slow to recognize the change, but better late than never. Finally, I will add 2 short sentences by Charlie that have been his decision clinchers for decades. Warren, think more about it. You're smart, and I'm right. And if you think more about it, you'll realize that it's right. I will add to Charlie's list a rule of my own: find a very smart, high-grade partner, preferably slightly older than you, and then listen very carefully to what he says. I think there's like an 8-year difference between Charlie and Warren. So Warren knows from personal experience there. And then one more piece I want to share here. Do the math. Seas rang up about 10 sales per minute during its prime operating time, racking up over $400,000 of volume during the 2 days. This was the Berkshire meeting last year, with all the goods purchased at a single location, selling products that haven't been materially altered in 101 years. What worked for Seas in the days of Henry Ford's Model T works now. Okay, that is such a powerful concept in investing. If you can find these businesses where you could be cranking it out 100 years later, I mean, that is just an incredible business, incredible investment, maybe even more so than an incredible business, because that's something you could just put in the coffee can for your kids, your grandkids, right? Generations. Was it Franklin who set up a trust? I think one in Philadelphia, one somewhere else. And he set it up so that it would compound for like 200, maybe not 200 years, some very long amount of time before it would start distributing those funds to the cause that it was set up for. That is a very powerful concept. Just to think really long term. I don't think enough investors think really long term. And here's a business, right, that's weathered 100 years. Think of the change that's happened over the last 101 years. And yet Seas is still cranking away. So that's a very powerful one to end on in this Berkshire Hathaway letter to partners. Letter to partners. All right, guys, I think that's all I wanted to run through today. I hope you enjoyed this letter as much as I did, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.